interesting because I went back and I pulled an essay that you wrote in The Guardian called Fascist America in 10 Easy Steps. This was back in 2007, so it was probably almost a prelude to your book, which came out the next year. And I found it very interesting to read back because it made me a little bit ashamed of myself. At the time, I would defend these things like the Patriot Act, which I thought were a necessary response after 9/11. But you talked about a lot of warning signs that were troubling, identifying internal enemies. You talked about the fact that people were being demonized, and a massive internal surveillance system was being. Again, the pretext was to fight terrorism, the harassment of citizens, arbitrary detention and release, a controlling of the press, dissent equals treason. And so I almost wondered, looking back at it, I thought to myself, wow, I would have been very dismissive had I read this article in 2007, but reading it now, I'm actually on board with you in thinking that these were some very bad things that we allowed to happen in our country, and they have opened the gates, paved the way for a lot of the tyrannical impulses that we see today. So in a way, I'd say you have been consistent all along, and people like me have had to re-examine some of our somewhat, I think, blithe support of measures that could easily have been abused, but we didn't see it quite at the time. Would you agree today that when I read that Governor Abbott is thinking of lifting restrictions now in Texas? Of course, Ron DeSantis has been out front in Florida. When you look at people like Cuomo, when you look at people like Newsom in California, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, isn't it true that these tyrannical impulses now are coming predominantly from the left?
I mean, Dinesh, yes, I will give you that, but I'm not going to let you off that easily, respectfully. In 2008, I remember well that you were one of the people defending really unconstitutional steps from the Bush administration, always, and there's always a good reason, right? Terrorism, Guantanamo, the ticking time bomb. I mean, I remember these arguments well. We have to torture them, so we'll find out where the next dirty bomb is going to be released in Times Square. And I remember, kind of yelling at the TV screen at that time, because it was more a TV screen than a computer screen. There is no such thing as opening these gates of hell, basically, in terms of protecting the Constitution, and then managing what you release. And I'm not putting it all at your feet, but it always seems like a good idea. And now the left is absolutely making the same mistake. There's always an emergency. And the brilliant, amazing thing about looking back in history is there was always an emergency. There was the Kristallnacht, there was the fire against
the Reichstag fire, right?
Exactly. There were emergency measures in Mussolini's Italy. There were terrorists in Chile when martial law was declared. There's always an emergency. And what I can also say is that as a former political consultant, I advised the Clinton campaign for reelection, and I advised Gore 2000 directly. The rationale for closing down freedoms is so tempting to leaders on the left or the right in a democracy, because let's face it, democracy is annoying, it's difficult. It is much easier for leaders on the left or right to just have fewer, you know this better than most people, fewer people at the table, fewer stakeholders. You can please them more easily, and you can rationalize. So, as Rahm Emanuel said, and quoting Churchill, I think, never waste a good crisis, never waste a good emergency. Naomi Klein has made this argument as well. Crises give people opportunities to exploit them. I'm not saying this crisis isn't real. I'm not saying the terrorist crisis was real. I was in, New York, living there during 9/11. I smelled the smoke. My kids were affected by it. That is not the issue. The issue is that Constitution has to be protected in times of emergency and times when there's nothing particularly going wrong. Because as you point out, the edifice has been constructed. I mean, I promise I'll stop, but in 2012, I sat in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan with almost no other journalists, listening to Obama's lawyers argue that they had the right to detain journalists forever without charge or trial. It was Chris Hedges at that point. And literally, where was CNN? Where was Fox? Where was everyone? This was so momentous. And so the National Defense Authorization Act is the law of the land now, and it allows any president, including President Biden or President Trump, if he comes back, next time around, or Kristi Noem or whoever it is, to detain any American without charge or trial. But we don't even need those powers now because the pandemic has allowed governors and boards of health to enact emergency measures, to crush businesses, to impose on people's physical bodies, making decisions about vaccination that should be personal decisions or family decisions for children, to suppress assembly in New York State. I can't even gather with more than 10 people without risking a $15,000 fine. My potluck on the 14th is going to be illegal if 11 people show up. The emergency measures are all around us, and we are barely allowed to notice because lockdown helps us keep from noticing. We're isolated from one another. We're kept from going to a town hall and saying, what the heck, we need our Constitution back.
Exactly right. Hear, hear.